Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am very excited to have on the program today Emily Makelky. She is a former high school business computer education teacher turned curriculum geek, and she's the vice president of the Curriculum Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that partners with school districts to improve teaching and learning by developing a local curriculum first, which, if you know me, you know I love this idea. And I want you to also check out episode 657 of Transformative Principal, which is called Using AI Layering to Create Hyper-Localized Curriculum. Brent on that one talked about what he's doing, and it is amazing. So you're going to want to listen to that one and this one. I'm sure we're going to touch on some things. That one just released, so Emily hasn't heard it yet. And so, you know, she can't speak to it yet, but I'll bring in some things from that. So we're going to start with that. And if you've heard this name Makelky before, you know that I love the Makelky family, all of them. And I'm really excited. Emily and I have been chatting for the past few years. She is Eric Makelky's wife, and I didn't realize that this family is like steeped in education when I first met Eric so many years ago. And now each time I meet a new one, I'm just like, hey, you're awesome too. So Emily, welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. You know, I'm obviously excited to talk about curriculum today, but you know, when you used to have Eric on the podcast, you know, for so long, I always kind of wondered, are you going to pull his wife in to talk about the emotional side or being the spouse of a principal? Because it's heavy for sure.
It is. And, you know, we won't talk about that today. I won't put you on the spot because that was not the plan. But we should at some point have some spouses on, because spouses carry a big burden, and my wife certainly has, and you have, and lots of spouses have. And I'm sure that would be an interesting little discussion to have about how to manage that from the other side.
It would be. I would assume that all the principals would just be like, I know, I've heard it, I know. But anyway.
That's good. Well, we're going to talk about curriculum today. And so I want to start by talking about the difference between, well, define what curriculum is, how you see it, and then let's talk about the difference between curriculum and resources, and then we can get into some other things.
You bet. I think it's actually really simple. Curriculum, I would say the definition of curriculum is simply, what is it that we're teaching our kids? What is it that we value in our district and our kids need to learn? And really, it's just the what. In teaching and learning, there's the what, there's the why, there's the how, there's the how do you know, and kind of pulling it back to the PLC questions. It is the first PLC question. What do we want kids to know and be able to do? That essentially is the curriculum piece. And thinking about kind of the differences between that and resources, I think that the two are confused very often, especially when you're talking to, say, elementary teachers. Very often in elementary schools, they talk about, well, we teach this curriculum, and they will name a resource or a program that they teach. But truly what I would say is that the curriculum comes even before you adopt that program, and figure out within our district or within our schools, what is it, what skills, what content, what knowledge do we want our kids to know and be able to do, and then find resources to support that.
So the resources is more the how we teach it, or the with what we teach it.
Yep.
So what about curriculum versus standards? Because in my experience, I would say that what you're describing as the curriculum is really the standards, and the resources is the curriculum, the how you teach the standards. Where do you fall on that?
You bet. You know, standards, of course, are adopted or created by the state, and they basically tell, you know, your teachers or your school districts, hey, within that state, hey, this is what kids need to know and be able to do. But the thing about those, there's two things that I want to kind of point out. The first is that actually is the minimum. And some teachers, probably especially math teachers right now, are saying like, what, that's the minimum and you expect us to teach more? Nope, not necessarily. I don't expect you to teach more, but If there are some skills, or if there's content that is not included, or that are not included in your state standards, but that you value as a school district, as a community, and you want to include that, you can. You have you have permission, you have the flexibility to do that and include that into your curriculum.
Yeah, so we won't get into this whole discussion about the minimum standard and whether or not states are trying to force too much, or any of that stuff.
Sure.
Because that's a whole separate discussion, and we're just going to recognize that if you work in the United States, the state has a curriculum or a set of standards that you are required. That's the minimum that you should be teaching.
Correct.
And we can agree with that and we can move on from that discussion, because the key piece here is that you basically have to make sure that those things that are supposed to be taught are actually taught. And if that's the case, then you're doing the job that the state is requiring, which is totally fine. But for anybody to think that that minimum is the doctrine, the thing that only this and nothing but this is just kind of crazy in my mind.
Sure.
Like this whole sola scriptura thing, like this is the only thing and we can't accept anything else.
Yeah.
Only the standards that the state says is all we can teach. That seems a little bizarre, right?
I agree. And I would honestly say that would, to me, it sounds like a cop-out for teachers or school districts to say, well, no, we can't do more than what the state says. I would just say that's kind of a cop-out. You absolutely can. And perhaps you should, depending on the factors in your school district.
Yes. And it's going to be hard to not do more than the standards, because there's the implicit curriculum, the explicit curriculum, and then other biases and things that you bring in and things that you think are important that you want your kids to know that aren't necessarily in the standards. And so I said we weren't going to go into this, so we're not going to. So we're going to move on. But the next thing is developing this curriculum, what it is that you're going to teach at your local level and how important that is. So talk about why that matters and how local should we get? School, department, or should it be limited to the district? How do you manage that?
We suggest that local means school district, so district wide. So, and really the reason that we say that is because very often we have kids transfer from one school within a district to a different school within a district. And so if you keep the curriculum the same, at least what it is you're teaching, and if you think about pacing being the same, and that really is kind of a discussion maybe for another time, but also a discussion at your kind of district-wide decision-making level. The reason behind that is so that teachers can collaborate and talk about what's working for them and basically how can you be a better teacher, but also for those kids that transfer from one school to another, so that there's no time wasted. They kind of are able to, as much as possible, pick up where they left off and continue on. So we would say that your curriculum, we would recommend creating a guaranteed and viable curriculum at the district level.
So having that at the district level, why do we bring the staff in to do this? What's their role in working on creating that curriculum for the district?
There are a few things to kind of consider when doing this. First, this is a big ask. And for sure, all of your administrators listening right now are like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to ask them to do another thing. They're going to revolt. And
pause right there.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
So I'm doing a doctoral program right now. And last night in my class, one of the principals said, I feel like I can never ask my teachers to do anything more because they're always doing so much. And I got to tell you, Emily, that is such a cop-out. It drives me crazy because teachers want to be doing meaningful work. Developing the curriculum that you're going to teach is meaningful work. Yeah. You know what they don't want to do? They don't want to do another baloney, doesn't matter form that the district needs or something that doesn't impact what's going on in their classroom.
Yep.
So it's not that teachers are too busy to do the things that they need to do. It's that we ask them to do stupid things, like filling out a form for reimbursement. Like,
Yeah, sure.
that is one of the things that is a little tedious thing. It doesn't take a ton of time, but it takes enough that it disrupts your flow, and it's not what teachers are typically good at.
Yep.
This, however, is the thing that they should be spending their time and energy on, figuring out what and how to teach their kids that are right there in front of them. Thank you. I go on.
I could kind of just see you like step up onto that soapbox and step back down.
I do that a lot. Yes.
I love it. That's okay. Yeah, and I would 100% agree. What I would argue too is that developing your local curriculum is the first thing that you should do. So, or that you should have your teachers do. Figuring out, because it's the foundation of all of teaching and learning.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I got to stop you again.
Okay.
Because if you do this work, then a new teacher coming on, how do you ask the new teacher to be involved in the curriculum process if you've been doing this work for 5 years, let's say?
Yeah.
What's their role? Because what it sounds like you're saying is you need to start and then everybody does it and then we're done. And I don't think that's what you're actually saying.
No, it's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying though is if you have not already been through this process, if you haven't already identified what your curricular targets are, then pause maybe some of your other initiatives and focus on this one first. Then revisit it. Curriculum work never ends. And I am a huge proponent for, if something isn't use your common sense. If something is no longer working, let's not just continue to do it because, well, we are just told this is what we have to do. But hey, let's revisit this and say, you know what, it's not working. Let's fix it. So typically, and really best case scenario is that, okay, we go through this process, say for math, and we create their local curriculum. And then and put it in draft form. We try it out for a year, year two. We develop some assessments that align to it. Great. We've got this nice little package that now our teachers can kind of use moving forward. Excuse me. But then we do need to revisit it. As far as new teachers coming in, this is like a huge help. I know when I started teaching and I taught business and computers, there was nothing anywhere about what is it that I should be teaching. And I actually came from the business world and started teaching after I had been doing something else for a while. So when I came in, I'm kind of looking around my classroom like, okay, so what is it that I should be teaching? And I went down to my principal's office and he said, well, I don't know, you're the professional, teach what you think is right. And I remember...
That's huge. Emily.
Oh my gosh.
Like being told you're the professional, you decide what to teach. That is not what most teachers hear. Most teachers hear, this is what you have to teach, this is how you have to teach it. And it is incredible. Like, if that's really the case, just buy an AI bot to do it, because what's the point of having a human there?
Right.
I mean, I'm not kidding either. If we know exactly what to teach and how to teach, just have the AI do it.
Sure.
I'm sorry I keep interrupting.
No, you're good.
You went to your principal.
I did. Well, and what was very scary for me was a couple of things. I was not a teacher at that time. I was just beginning my degree. And so when he said that, I kind of was terrified. I was like, oh shoot, I don't know. And in that same conversation, when I applied to become a teacher, I applied for the computer applications position. But as I was talking to him 2 weeks before the start of school, I also found out that I was going to be teaching Intro to Business, Multimedia, Advanced Multimedia, Accounting, and Yearbook. All things, yeah. I was like, okay, so I don't know what I didn't even know what the word multimedia meant, let alone teach it, and advanced multimedia. So kind of bringing it back to my point about, if you have this curriculum that is created, it's ready to go, and you have assessments that are aligned to them, you have a new teacher that comes in and you do a bit of training with them on, this is how you read the curriculum, this is what it means, this is how you use it to develop your lesson plans. Then they at least know what is it I'm supposed to be teaching. And now they can use kind of data points, what worked, what didn't work. And in my case, I was the only teacher in the district. It was a very small school district, so I was the only one that even taught these things. But when you have multiple teachers, they can talk about what's working, what isn't working, and really just go back to that whole PLC idea and just focus
Yeah.
on getting better.
Yeah, and the idea of curriculum being constantly evaluated and
Yeah.
reviewed and checked, a perfectly appropriate thing for a new teacher who's never taught it before to do is to come in and say, here's where it doesn't make sense.
Sure.
And to give them a role as a newbie with fresh eyes who doesn't know, hasn't been there for 20 years and doesn't know all the ins and outs. That's a great opportunity to listen to them and see what they have to say. Liz Wiseman wrote a book called Rookie Smarts, where she talks about how powerful it is for someone to be a rookie, which means that you're not bound by the things that already are happening there because you don't know. And I was talking to someone yesterday who was in the business world and he became a writer. And let me see if I just took this note. He said, it's often better to come from an outsider's perspective because you don't fall into the assumptions and all the things that are built into that already. And you can be critical without being derogatory or dismissive, but you're critical because you're new and you don't understand it. And that's a great opportunity for new teachers to be involved in the curriculum design process the day they start.
I agree with that. I do want to push back just a little.
Okay. Well, let's hear it. Bring it on. Sister.
Bring it on. No, really what I want to push back on is there, at least in our curriculum development process, we spend about 8 days with this committee of teachers, kindergarten, pre-K, if you have it, through 12th grade, talking about the vertical alignment piece. What is their true focus of what's going on? And a lot of times when you have a new teacher come in, and I don't necessarily mean like a brand new teacher straight out of school, but a teacher maybe from another school district that taught something different or taught something, and is just comfortable in what they're used to, I do want to caution you not to just say, yep, you can go ahead and change that because it's what you're used to, but instead, let's talk about, even if you have to pull that committee back in and say, hey, these are the conversations that we had, and this is why we wrote it and put it together the way that it is. So I'm not saying no to what you said by any means, because I think there's so much validity in that. But also, there is validity to that whole process of having the full K-12 team together talking through who owns what, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that because what I was thinking was a brand new out of college teacher,
Sure.
First time in the classroom. That's what I was thinking.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because there is a difference between someone coming in with 10 years experience, new to a district. And here's the other thing. In education, we act like nobody ever leaves and nobody ever changes. But the reality is, it's rare to not have someone new in your building at a school level every single year.
Right.
And so change is actually constant. And when I was principal of a school in Fairbanks, it was a 7-8 middle school, and a third of half of our students were military affiliated. So every year, a third of them moved out,
Sure.
and a third new moved in. So every year, we had about 2/3 of our student body that was brand new to our school. And
Wow.
with that, we had new teachers. We had teachers who were military associated who left also. And what I loved about that was that we didn't have to hold on to these old things because only a third of the kids might actually remember that was going on.
Yeah.
And so it was really easy to say, oh, I got on one of my counselors about this one time. She was like, we used to do it like this and now we do it like this. And I was like, why would you even say that? You don't need to say we used to do it this way because it's not a change for them because everything is new to them.
Yeah.
So just explain it how it works right now.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter how it used to work. We can change things every year very easily because of this unique situation that we're in. But back to my original point, we're always changing. And so we need to have plans for when we do change and when somebody leaves and somebody comes in, a way to keep the continuity that we think is important there when teachers change, leadership changes, students change, all those things change. And we need to have some way to make sure that the things we think are important are still continuing even with those changes.
That's right. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And kind of thinking from the perhaps principal perspective on this, I really think it's important to make sure that the culture, or maybe it's the climate, I'm gonna get those two mixed up a little bit.
That's all right. We'll call it culture.
Culture.
Because that's probably what you're talking about.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But basically that it's okay to mess up. It's okay to try something out. You're not expected to be, I don't know, the authority in your content. And I'm speaking from the high school perspective, because I find that at the elementary teachers are very comfortable just trying things, collaborating, messing up. Like, that is very normal. But at the high school level, it doesn't tend to be. I feel like high school teachers tend to be very defensive and very resistant to change. And so kind of making sure that they know they're not going to be in trouble because they screwed up or because they wanted to try it and it didn't work. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues with that is that high school teachers and middle school teachers, to an extent also, are focused on the content area that they're teaching, because that's what they spend the most time with.
Yep.
They have kids cycle through their classroom 45, 55, 90 minutes a day, but they are focusing on their content all the time. And that is one of the challenges that we face, is that they put more emphasis on the content than they do on the students, and they need to remember that they're teaching students, they're not teaching content.
Agreed.
And that is a difficult thing to adjust your perspective on, especially when you've been in this system for your whole career of, this is what it's like. I've said this many times on the podcast, so people who listen regularly, this is just one of my constant refrains. In Russian, the way that you say that you are a teacher, it is impossible to say, I teach math, or I teach English, or I teach first grade. You say, I teach students to that math. And basically the way that it translates is, I take students to the content area. And that is a much different approach than how we talk about teaching in the United States. We teach English to students. And the reality is that really you are taking those students to the content. And if you think about it like that, it changes your perspective and makes you think about it differently. And that's one of the powerful things that when I learned Russian, I was like, wow, this is deep. And there's real depth to this understanding of what it means to teach. That you're not teaching a content, you're teaching students. And the focus should be on those students. But it's important to know what you're doing with this content, but it's always got to be secondary to the students. And I know not everybody agrees with me on that, but that is a hard line in the sand that I draw.
I do agree with you on that. And part of the work that we do is we help school districts develop a curriculum coordinating council, is what we call it. But it's this council that oversees all of teaching and learning, very similar to a guiding coalition within PLCs, except ours would be district wide and not just school-based. But one of the conversations that I always had as a consultant with this group is really just talking about, what is it, Maslow's
hierarchy of needs.
Thank you. Yes. So really focusing on that with your students. If they aren't getting food at home, if they're hungry all the time, they're not going to learn. Okay, it doesn't matter what you're trying to teach them, they're not going to learn. And building relationships. I know that was my husband's big thing, making sure to build relationships with those students. If your student does not feel comfortable and safe or feel like they have a relationship with their teachers, they're not going to learn. So yes, we focus on the curriculum piece and what is it that you're supposed to be teaching, but you can't even really get to that until you make sure that you've got those other foundational pieces set up and really functioning well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the principal's role in doing this.
Sure.
Because we've talked a lot about district-wide stuff, but the principal really should be, a lot of people say the instructional leader, you're probably going to say the curriculum leader. Like, what does that mean for the role of the principal?
I would say that all of this work lives or dies with the principal. So often we'll be working with a committee that includes teachers from, various schools within the district, various grade levels within the district, and they'll raise their hand and say, hey, this is awesome work. I love what we put together, but how are teachers going to be held accountable to this? Because if principals don't truly understand this work, then they're not going to make sure that the expectation and hold their teachers accountable to teaching it. So if that's the case, then it dies. But if, as a principal, if you can participate in the process, I think that is just enormous. And really, I don't mean come to the meetings and sit in the back of the conference room and still be on your email, checking your phone, texting. Like, that really, it almost defeats the purpose. Like, it would almost be better if you weren't there, because then teachers can see that you really don't care about it. So if you're able to, and I know how busy principals are.
But it's still a cop-out if you say you're too busy.
Right.
You choose what you focus on. So that excuse doesn't fly to anybody listening to this show.
So if you can block off on your calendar, the curriculum development dates, and I would also say, and actually this came from my father-in-law, who I think has also been on your podcast, Jeff Makelky, yes. And he suggested select a content area. So if you were a social studies teacher, if that's where you feel most comfortable, then sit on the social studies subject area committee and participate as a teacher would, as a full committee member, participate in the process in developing this, so that when you go back to your school and to your teachers, you can say, this is the work that we did, this is how we did it, this is why, which is the biggest piece. You've really gotta hammer in your why. Why do we do it? And then why is it so important to hold your teachers accountable?
Yeah, this is good. So one of the things that you said kind of disagrees with the point you just made.
Great.
Which is the teachers are the professionals, and yet the principal needs to be at the meetings. And this is an area where I would diverge a little bit, and I would say it's essential for the principal to know what's going on, but I wouldn't say that the principal has to be at those meetings necessarily, but I'm open to discussing this.
Sure.
And so how do you balance that the teachers are professionals and should be able to make these decisions with the principal needs to be there and engaged in it? Like, really, the principal, in my opinion, should probably take a step back and say, you're the professionals, I'm going to support you, and I don't have to be at those meetings because you know how to do this. How do you reconcile that? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I suppose that what I mean is that the principal should participate, but not in an evaluative way. So the principal should not be there saying or judging their teachers. Instead, they should be their peer and discussing and working through why is this happening. Now, if there are principals that are going to go and judge their teachers and say, no, you need to be teaching this, then perhaps they should not be sitting on those subject area committees. But if you're able, as a principal, if you're able to kind of put yourself back into your teacher role and discuss and talk through, because that's the point of this work. When we work with school districts, we say it'll take 8 days throughout the school year, or perhaps over the summer or something. But there's a lot of discussions that happen about what is it, what skills, what content that we should be teaching. And so I think that if a principal comes in and is able to just participate in those conversations to kind of determine that, I think it's healthy and I think it's okay. And I think it will help kind of improve that piece moving forward within your school district. And they can explain to teachers that did not sit on those committees what happened. Why is this change not a scary change, perhaps? How can we embrace this? Oh, yeah, and I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but thinking about the principal as an instructional leader, being able to provide feedback to your teachers. When you do a walkthrough and you fully understand curriculum and how it was developed, what the learning targets are, and then you do a walkthrough with your teachers and you can say, hey, I saw by your pacing guide and your curriculum that this is the learning target you were supposed to be teaching or you were expecting to teach. I didn't see any evidence of it, visually. It's nowhere, whatever. And I couldn't hear the alignment of your instructional strategies to the curricular target. You can have kind of some meaningful conversations. And I'm pretty sure that was a tangent. I apologize. Let's rein it back in.
It's okay. It's all good.
Okay.
So to that piece about the instructional leader, I think that is important also, but I think we misunderstand what that means. And a lot of times we give the impression that the principal is the main expert and the one who knows more than anybody else. And I don't think that is either necessary or wise, because principals are managing this big, huge system, and they're setting the vision, they're guiding it, and they're setting up the school for success and all this kind of stuff. And for them to be the final answer on everybody's skill and proficiency at teaching is a little bit silly, to be honest, because I don't believe that is their most essential role. I think those other things I described of designing the school, which I talk about in my books, of you have just a warm body who's just there in the school. You have a manager, and that person just makes sure that things don't go wrong. And then you have a leader who sets a vision and makes plans and does a good job and is the instructional leader. But then you have a designer who actively designs and sets up the school for success. And if the designer is the one who's doing everything, it's not going to work. The idea of a one act or a one person play does exist, where that person is the director and the sole actor and they play all the parts. That does exist, but it's a lot better when there's a director and a whole bunch of actors who are playing different roles. And that's the thing that actually draws people to movies and shows and events and things like that. So the other analogy that we like to draw is with sports, that, there's a coach and the coach is not out on the field playing, and the coach can't and shouldn't be out on the field playing. And, a great coach right now is Andy Reid, who played football in college, but then became a coach and didn't play in the NFL. And yet he's one of the most successful coaches out there. And so we have to understand that your role is different and you're not a teacher anymore. And you have to let those decisions be made and let other people do those things. And this is still an idea that I'm working through, but there's something there about your job is that much different from a teacher. You can't still be doing the teacher things. And giving feedback about curriculum alignment is one of those things, in my opinion, that principals need to let go of, and teachers need to hold themselves and each other more accountable than relying on the principal to be the one to do that. And this is the first time I'm saying this out loud. How does that jive with you?
I think,
feel free to poke holes.
No, I actually really love it. And I'm going to put my teacher hat back on. I remember in my, I don't know if it was my interim evaluation or summative or something like that. But I remember, and this is going back 15 years or so, but still, it was kind of a rubric situation where I was evaluated on, 150 different things. And I was docked on something about my instruction. And I asked my principal, I said, okay, that's great. I'm happy to work on that. Can you give me an example of what that might look like? And he said, no, I can't. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And I don't blame him at all for that. But it's difficult when you're being evaluated. Exactly. And they can't go there. Their brains can't, my principal couldn't go there, and that is completely fine. I am not criticizing him one bit. It's more that evaluation piece where I was being evaluated and I was frustrated. So I actually do really like that idea of, hey, let's kind of figure out what our roles are, and we can let go of some of those things. I think that's completely fine. But I am going to push back a little bit that I do strongly feel like the principal does need to fully understand what curriculum is and why it's the expectation, and then how to hold your teachers accountable and make sure that they are using it. We just have a lot of school districts that we work with where where, excuse me, when we roll out the new curriculum, there are teachers that say, yeah, I'm just not going to do that. I'm just not doing that. And it's not because of it's not because they're good teachers and feel like it's wrong. It's because they don't want to change.
Yeah.
And I think that
And
is perhaps I don't know if that's a rule of a principal, but I don't think.
see,
Yeah, sorry, you go.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That is not a instructional leadership problem. That is a culture problem and a designer of a school problem. That if somebody is unwilling to change, that is the role of the principal to either get them out of the school or put them in a position where they don't have to change or do something to make it so that they are aligned with the vision of the school. And if you're not, you really shouldn't be at that school. And that's just all there is to it. And so then, that brings up all these other questions that we're not going to get into
Sure.
of, a new principal comes in and they're going to be there for 3 years and this teacher's been there for 20 and is going to stay for another 10. Like, those are things that districts really need to evaluate when they move people and when they hire people and when they set principals up for failure or success and what those things look like. And the plan really should be like, this is your role. Like, if we just need a warm body, then the principal should not be making instructional leadership decisions because they're just there to pass the time.
Sure.
If they're being moved to that school because there was a problem in another school, but they can't fire them, for example, then that's on the district and they should not expect, and that principal should not expect to be an instructional leader at that school and that stuff happens. We like to talk about, pretend like it doesn't, but it sure does.
Oh man.
That specific instance, somebody not being willing to change, that is not an instructional leadership problem. That is a vision, that is a culture, that is a school designer problem that principals need to own and take on, but that has nothing to do with the curriculum. That is just hinge point. That is just, what's the word? Focal point, the thing that is causing the teacher to show their unwillingness to to buy into the vision of the district and the school.
Yeah.
And that is what the real problem is. But that has nothing to do with curriculum or instruction. That just happens to be the spark that's lighting that bigger fire.
Yep. I agree.
This is a good discussion. I'm glad we're having this.
I wish your listeners could see you right now because you're fired up.
I feel that I'm getting more fired up as time goes on because I've been doing this thing for more than 10 years. And we keep coming back to these same conversations. And I can only imagine how someone like Todd Whitaker feels, who's been doing this way longer than I have. And the same things keep coming up, but we got to change the dynamic for things to really to be different. And I think that being an instructional leader is great. But here's the thing that I really want to get to. And I know we're not going to have time to get into all this, but my approach to curriculum is much different than a lot of people's. And when we stopped focusing on saying this is what we want the kids to learn, and we started focusing on how do we make sure that kids are enrolled, which means they're choosing to be part of their learning and they are somewhat in control of their own learning, that it's not all coming from the adults in the building, our students just blew our expectations out of the water all across the board. The punk kids, the kids with disabilities, the gifted kids, every single kid learned more than we expected them to as we changed that approach. So our focus away from curriculum and focusing on actually engaging the kids in what they're doing, that flipped a switch and kids just blew up. Like their learning just went crazy. And so my fear is that we're starting in the wrong place with all this stuff. And I probably should have started the conversation with this, but
At a time.
but next time we can talk more about this. But that's really an issue that I see in our education system, is that when we force it, which is what we do when we have scope and sequences and we have timelines of when when teachers should teach what and pacing and all that, we're saying this is how and when kids need to learn these things. And the reality is that learning is such an individual thing, and it is so personal to every single person that yes, you can make it happen this way, but it is, you talked about the bare minimum with the standards, right? This is really the bare minimum of instruction, and the focus is on instruction. The focus is not on learning. And there's a big difference between those two. I just touched the tip of the iceberg. What do you have to say?
I think I would just say, is there a way to kind of combine the two thoughts? I agree 100% that kids all learn differently at different times. And I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and kind of looking at their classmates, it's very clear that kids learn in different ways and at different times. And I really hate the idea of kids being penalized because they don't have it yet. They haven't gotten it yet. And so how do we kind of combine the two ideas and think about, but what is it that they really do need to learn? And maybe it's not at the end of kindergarten they must learn this, or the end of first grade they must learn this, but by the time they leave our schools, they must know these things if they're going to be successful in the real world. I do really think that there are some skills and there's content that really the majority of kids should know. And I don't think that's calculus. I don't think that's kind of those higher level things, but I do think that there are just things that our kids need to know to be good humans and effective individuals. And so how do we make sure that they do get those things? How do we focus on those things in ways that allow for their own engagement and their own kind of processing to make sure that they're learning those? I think that those are conversations kind of district-wide to have, or school-wide, or whatever. But I do love the idea. I agree wholeheartedly that education does need to change. And I do think that, I don't know, what I've struggled with quite a bit is when we try to make that change, there's so much pushback from so many stakeholders, not all stakeholders, but from so many stakeholders, that people kind of suck back in and say, okay, never mind, let's not rock the boat, let's continue with what we're doing. When really, I kind of feel like there's just a hump, and if you move past that and start seeing, like you did, when you start seeing success, then roll with that success and let's make it happen. But instead, I feel like a lot of times we get afraid and say, never mind, I'm worried about my job, for instance. I'm worried about whatever else.
Yep. Yeah. It's so, yeah, there's so much to unpack there. But I will say this, once you get past the hump, you're absolutely right. Things change. And parents are like, my kid's never been this happy with school.
Yep.
And whatever you're doing, I want you to keep doing it.
Yep.
That is powerful, because that's real, and that is something that parents feel. And when kids feel that way at school, it affects other parts of their life also. And so they might not be as crabby as teenagers with their parents when they're having good days at school. But when they've got the thumb pushing down on them at home, and then they go to school and they got the thumb pushing down on them again, that's really tough for them. So, all right, this was a good conversation. I think we're going to need to talk again. We didn't even get to AI. We didn't even get to so many things that we could talk about in the future.
Sure.
So, and you and I have been talking for years also, so we should just continue this. The thing that's so crazy is, like I said, I've been doing this for so long, and still there's so much left to talk about.
Sure.
And there's so many great conversations to have. I encourage you to connect with Emily. She, as I mentioned, works for Curriculum Leadership Institute, and you can find them at cliweb.org. And there's a link to that in the show notes at transformativeprincipal.org. And Emily's email address is on there also. My last question I always ask is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you, Emily?
I guess I would say something they could do this week is starting to ask about, we didn't even talk about this, but starting to ask about learning in measurability, meaning instead of saying, okay, are your kids understanding what they're supposed to understand? Talk about it in what is it, how did they show you that they understand it? If that makes sense. We didn't talk about that yet another time, but that is a piece of curriculum work, making sure that it's measurable. What does it look like when a kid understands something?
Good stuff. Man, you're leaving us with like this.
Oh, cliffhanger.
Boom. That's great. Okay, Emily, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to have you on
Thank you.
again.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
We should probably just schedule it, once after the summer when you get all settled in the new year, we should do that again.
Thank
This
you.
was great.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me.